Well, we're all here to talk about science fiction. My name is Russ Holstein. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the SETI Institute, and I've been asked to chair this panel. I don't know why, but you can judge how good a job I did when we're done. But we have a great panel here. We have five distinguished panelists here who are going to talk to us about the issue of, do you need good science to have good science fiction? And since we have five panelists, most of the other panels are four people, and since this is really kind of a matter more of opinion than fact, I thought we try more of an interactive approach and ask everybody to make a statement, because I always feel bad for the fifth person who's making a statement and has to come up with something unique. So maybe I've asked the panelists to give me some questions, and we've got a list of questions. So I will ask questions to the panelists. Hopefully they'll be able to interact with one another, and then the audience will have a chance to do the same. Let me introduce the panel to you. Andy Franknoy, who you've probably seen earlier today because he's been everywhere, is the chair of the astronomy department at Foothill College, and he's a senior educator at the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. He teaches courses on astronomy and physics for poets to about 1,000 students each year. In 2007, he was selected as the Professor of the Year for the state of California by the Carnegie Endowment for Education. And maybe the first person you've met who has an asteroid named after him. Asteroid 4859 has been named Asteroid Franknoy by the International Astronomical Union in recognition of his contribution to science popularization. He currently serves as vice chair of the board of the trustees at the SETI Institute. Robert Sawyer, one of only 8 writers in history to win all 3 of the science fiction field's top awards for Best Novel of the Year: the Hugo, the Nebula, and the John W. Campbell Memorial Award. He frequently writes about SETI, including the Hugo Award finalists Rollback and Factoring Humanity. The ABC TV series Flash Forward was based on his novel of the same name. Frank Summers. Dr. Frank Summers is an outreach astrophysicist for the Hubble Space Telescope. His specialty is cinematic scientific visualizations of research data and supercomputer simulations. Dr. Summers is a writer, science advisor, and scientific visualization supervisor on the IMAX film Hubble 3D. In addition, he was a curator for the rebirth of New York's Hayden Planetarium in 2000. And I'll give him this plug for all of you who are interested. His 24-lecture DVD course on the solar system is available as one of the great courses from the teaching company. Paul Frommer, the linguist who developed the Na'vi language for James Cameron's film Avatar, is Professor Emeritus of Clinical Management Communications and former director for the Center for Management Communications at USC's Marshall School of Business. Since the release of Avatar, Na'vi has attracted a worldwide community of enthusiasts who are assisting Dr. Frommer in expanding the language further. In addition to Na'vi, he also developed the Martian language for the Disney film John Carter. Kevin Grazier, did I get that right, Kevin?
Close.
Close. Was the scientific advisor for Battlestar Galactica, Eureka, and The Event, and co-author of The Science of Battlestar Galactica. For 15 years, he was an investigation scientist on the Cassini-Huygens mission to Saturn and Titan, and for his research performs large-scale, long-term computer simulations of early solar system dynamics and evolution. So, well, that's me on the last page, so I'll just skip that piece and we'll go right to questions. First of all, where are my questions?
Kind of a meta question.
And here we are, a meta question. All right, so if any of the panelists want to, have this, you may have prepared your 2-minute, 3-minute statement. If you want to give your overview of this, great. But what I'm going to do is ask everybody at the end to sort of give us their takeaway ideas when we wrap up. First of all, let me ask you, how did you get involved in science fiction? How did you wind up on this panel? How did you wind up associated with science fiction? Who wants to take that?
I'll take it. Since somebody's got to start somewhere, and what I put on my tax return where it says occupation is science fiction writer, so I'll take it. I was born in 1960. In 1968, my father took me to see 2001: A Space Odyssey in the theater. It was easy enough to do when you're born in a year that ends with a 0 to do the math, even when you're 8 years old. I was going to be 41 when this vision of the world was going to be a reality, supposedly. It was a promissory note. This is what I was going to get. And my father sitting next to me, I was still, even at 8 years old, able to do the math and know that he was 43 years old. So when I was younger than my dad was going to be, this is what my life was going to be. And I discovered there was a literature, a genre, a whole field that was devoted to telling me what the future might plausibly hold. And of course, that's the big distinction between science fiction and fantasy. Science fiction being things that plausibly might happen, and fantasy being things that never could happen. I never had any interest in the latter. I forced myself through some Tolkien at one point, but it didn't interest me in the slightest because there was no way it was ever going to impact my real existence. But science fiction, 2001: A Space Odyssey, the original Star Trek in first run, and I'm from Canada where we had an awful lot of Jerry Anderson, the British puppeteer who was responsible for Fireball XL5 and Thunderbirds and Stingray, Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, later the live action series UFO, and the execrable I can't even name it now, Space 1999, which I was hoping would not be my life by the time I was 39 years old in 1999. I did want the moon to hang around and let me have more romantic evenings looking up at it. That's how I got into it.
Few people know this, but I actually was going to be an astronomer. Didn't last very long. I was an astrophysics major. I was going way, way back at the University of Rochester, wound up with a math degree. Went into the Peace Corps and discovered I really loved languages, and that's really where my talent lay. So when I went to graduate school, I entered a graduate program in linguistics. I got a doctorate in linguistics, and then decided, I really want to see what the business world is like. So then you see it's going from here to here to here to here. Sorry. So I joined the Los Angeles Corporation, was there for 10 and a half years, became a vice president. It folded. I went back to the university and discovered there was such a thing as business communication, and I became a professor at the Marshall School of Business of USC. And of course, that naturally leads to creating a language for Avatar, right? Well, it turns out, that in 2005, James Cameron's production company was looking for a linguist who could develop an alien language for a film. We didn't even know it was called Avatar. It was called Project 880. That was the code term. I found out about it through the intervention of a good buddy of mine who was in the linguistics department. I was in the business school. So he forwards me the email, and he says, you might take a look at this. And I said, yes. So I essentially applied for the job. I wrote to Jim Cameron expressing tremendous enthusiasm and sent him a copy of the workbook I had developed. I got called in for an interview. It went pretty well, and my life has not been the same since.
All right, I will say that I am here because my mom took me to tap dance classes when I was 10 years old. Now, you might not understand that, but let me draw the connections for you. I'm here as a scientist who has worked on documentary films, most prominently IMAX Hubble 3D. So I'm here probably be the grumpy old man to say, oh no, you must have the science perfect, which of course I won't say. But the reason I got to do those films is because I was a dancer when I was young. I was an ice skater. I've always had an artistic side to me, as well as the intellectual side. I've done ballroom dancing, and I met my wife in the ballroom dance club at UC Berkeley. And so when it came time to to consult on the IMAX film Cosmic Voyage, me and my artistic tendencies amongst the astronomers, not too many astronomers have that kind of background, I learned how well I could take what I learned on the dance floor and apply it to choreographing a camera, creating a scene, working through things to help create a movie. And so I'm really here thanks to my mom. So thanks, Mom.
And we're waiting for Supernova 1987A, an interpretive dance.
I'm not going to self-destruct here.
I was a graduate student at UCLA and toiling away, and the show Star Trek Voyager had just finished its second season, and a friend with whom I'd written some things in the past, we had an email exchange, and we were both little underwhelmed at what we viewed as potential that wasn't being lived up to with the series. So back then, Paramount would take unsolicited manuscripts, meaning you didn't have to have representation, you just need an agent. You could send in your manuscript in. They were really honest. They would say, we get about 3,000 a year. A good outcome happens to single digits. But if you want to send us your script, we will make you two promises. It will get read, and you'll get it back within 8 weeks to 8 months, and that's the only promise we're going to give you. So we said, we can write a story, and so we email exchange over an hour and a half, we come up with a story, we wrote that and sent it off, and we figured that the longer it takes to get back, the more it's moving up the chain of command. But we forgot about it, to be honest, because he's busy working and has a family. I was a grad student, not sleeping. And 7 months to the day later, the executive producer assistant calls me, says, Jerry, loved your story. Goes in a direction we don't really want to go, which I should point out they eventually did. But we think you're writing as promised, so we'd like to invite you to come pitch stories. So I went in and pitched several times for Star Trek Voyager, and the two people to whom I pitched most one was a fellow named Brian Fuller, and one was a fellow named Michael Taylor. Now, Brian Fuller has gone on to be huge. He's created Pushing Daisies, Dead Like Me, currently has 2 shows in production, a remake of The Munsters called Mockingbird Lane. It's a drama, not what they did the first time. And another show about the early days of Hannibal Lecter. So, and Michael Taylor I've worked with on several series since then, but I saw a presentation Ron Moore had given, who was the showrunner on Battlestar, at a convention when they only had a few bits of footage, and I contacted Brian, get me on that show. So he got me, he pitched me over sushi at lunch with Ron, and Ron called me in, and really it was like a 5-minute interview. And after the 5 minutes, he said, here's the Bible, here's 33, here's water, have at it. And so that's how I got the job on Battlestar. And then when Eureka started, they shared an office building, so at a get-to-know-you lunch, the 2 writer's assistants were talking. How do you solve your technical problems? We have a guy at JPL, an hour later I had a call. So that's how I got on Eureka. And it really is not entirely always what you know, it's who you know. And then also in Hollywood, what happens is people who work together successfully tend to work together in clumps. Joss Whedon has his cabal of people with whom he works, and so when you find people you know you can trust, you know are going to be there, and you genuinely like, you kind of stick with them. So the people who've been together on Battlestar, which was really an amazing experience. I tell people it was like crack. We were all addicted, we all had withdrawal symptoms when it ended, and we would all kill to do that again. But we all tend to work together. So the people with whom I work on 2 series now, I work on Defiance, it's a Sci-Fi Channel series that's coming out in about a year, and Falling Skies, and they're both a fairly decent Battlestar contingent on both. And so basically it's just the kind of people with whom we work together stick together. So I'm no longer at JPL, so I'm now doing this sort of full-time, but so I was doing that for the longest time, just part-time while I worked on the Cassini spacecraft.
So my entry is a little bit different. I actually got into astronomy through science fiction. When I was young, we came to America and I didn't speak a word of English. And my mom had this brilliant idea of having comic books be the first introduction to how you learn a new language, because the pictures help you learn the language. And I got fascinated by space comic books, learned English, so one of my first words was BAM, and then pow. But eventually moved on to science fiction books, first children's books and then books for adults. And it was through science fiction that I came to realize, and I later learned that Carl Sagan tells the same story, that I learned through science fiction that it's possible to have a job called an astronomer where you actually get to study the real universe. And having that background, and being an educator now full time, I've always thought that science fiction was a wonderful way to show people the astronomical concepts in a different way than through a textbook or through a technical description. So I use science fiction in my teaching. I keep a website on astronomical science fiction. I try to educate other teachers and people who work with young people about the power of science fiction to teach science. And you've all gotten a little article I wrote recently on some science fiction writers who use astronomy in a very effective way. way. So in a way, I see science fiction as an entree to learning science better.
So let me ask sort of the headline question. Does the science have to be good for science fiction to be good? And further, ask your personal opinion, does the science have to be good for you to enjoy science fiction?
The problem is we use a single name for a whole bunch of different things. The term science fiction is bandied about for everything from Star Wars, which has essentially no science content in it, and what little it does have is wrong, to things that are really meticulously worked out. Science fiction novels and the occasional media thing like 2001, where an awful lot of really sophisticated thinking and a lot of technical expertise has been gone into getting it right. And we use this bucket label of science fiction for all of it together. Because I like science fiction as a name, I wish it was solely applied to those things for which the science actually was accurate and correct and meaningful. There is truly a world of difference between Lost in Space and 2001: A Space Odyssey. And to consider them all as one thing is ridiculous. One truly is ridiculous, the other's sublime.
You know, neophyte story writers, neophyte screenwriters are counseled to never wake the audience from your dream. At the same time, your goal is to create more oh wow moments and fewer oh please moments. Because in the latter, when you create an oh please moment, and when you have, sometimes that involves when you get the science wrong. For some people, they will check out of your story. They will transition from being a person immersed in your creative vision to somebody sitting between four walls with their arms crossed saying, hang on. So certainly every science fiction show, movie, has its conceits, where the storyteller says, okay, just buy into this little thing. I know it's not quite right. This is good science fiction I'm referring to at this point. With a relatively good science content. Buy into this little conceit. I'll go for Battlestar, for example, FTL travel. If you don't have FTL travel, you never see another planet in our characters' lifetimes, and that's what we would call uninteresting. So buy into this little, and buy into the fact that what we just experienced is essentially 9/11, only the people attacking us are robots who look like us. And if you buy into that, we'll promise that we'll be pretty much faithful to the science for the rest of the series. And for the most part, that's what Battlestar did, with the exception of FTL travel and artificial gravity, which is kind of a standard conceit. The rest of the science, except sound in space, which none of us really wanted, but that kind of got foisted on us. But the rest of the science was pretty good. They listened to their science advisors. So I'd say that's good science fiction, whereas there will be a conceit, there will be bending or breaking the laws in a few places, and you kind of go with that in science fiction, but the rest of it, if it's good, you don't get people checking out.
Right, and I would say in the notes that I made up for this session, it very much follows along that idea that there are certain plot devices and the conceits that you're able to use. But as an astrophysicist, I can't turn off my analytic brain. A member of the audience asked me about Prometheus. How many of you have seen the movie Prometheus? And Ridley Scott is usually really, really good. But
No
there was
spoilers here. I'm going to put my fingers
No, it won't give away any of the plot device. Charlize Theron says, I didn't travel 500 million miles just to do whatever. And that phrase 500 million caught me. Because earlier in the film, they gave an indication of how far away the star was, and it's about 10 parsecs, which is 32.6 light years, which a light year being 6 trillion miles gives you almost 200 trillion miles. Okay? To get 500 million versus 200 trillion, my brain can't let that pass. And I know my wife sitting next to me didn't hear it at all. It went straight past her. So my education is sometimes a hindrance in some of my enjoyment of these science fiction films, but at least I know that, all right, you gotta let that pass. It's the really stupid things, when they break the rules, like you said, when Neo suddenly has his powers outside the Matrix, and you say, ah, shit, you just broke all the rules that you established. Why are you doing that? That's when it really starts to bother me.
I think part of the storytelling process is also remembering who says what. On Battlestar, when Colonel Ty said something like that, if he said 500 million, I wouldn't flag that at all, because he is not a scientist. You don't expect him to be right, and he probably thinks he's exaggerating. So I think in that case, she was a similar character. She's an exo. She's not a scientist. That's not her role to be accurate. I would have given that a pass in that particular case, given the character.
And I do give it a pass, but my brain will stop on it, just because that's the way I'm trained.
And I also think, by the way, in the beginning of the movie, you see the distance given in kilometers. It's something 3 point something times 10 to the 14 kilometers. And I think that was done to obscure something. I'm fairly certain I know what star they're at. And I think if they said we're at 37.4 light years, people would say, ah, I know what's going on there. So look at what stars are 37.4 light years away. That's kind of sort of G-like, and you can probably figure out where the next movie's going.
Well, so it seems to me that a key question here is just who the audience is and how sophisticated the audience is. I mean, if the audience is people like Frank and Kevin and everybody else here, you guys are not going to let bad science pass. You're going to pounce on it and say that doesn't work. The question is, how would that also apply to the more general audience? I mean, we can all think of movies that have had pretty questionable science and yet have been pretty commercially successful. In the case of Avatar, an awful lot of attention was paid, mainly on the part of Jim Cameron, to the science of the movie. In fact, the whole question of the science of Avatar has developed its own literature and websites and so on. There was a conference I attended a couple years ago at Caltech called The Science of Avatar, Is Pandora Possible? And Jim Cameron was there, and 3 bona fide scientists and a lot of questions from the audience. So the bottom line seemed to be it was mostly plausible, but not completely. An example would be this. There's this thing that has attained a certain amount of notoriety called unobtainium. Okay, this is supposed to be the most incredibly efficient superconducting material in the world, and one of its properties is that it levitates in a magnetic field, and that was the source of the famous floating mountains. Well, things, correct me if I'm wrong, things can levitate in magnetic fields. We have these bullet trains, of course, that rise up. So qualitatively, this might have been possible. Quantitatively, Jim Cameron was perfectly aware that if you do the calculations, you find that the magnetic field has to be, if it's going to lift a mountain, has to be so strong that it would actually rip the hemoglobin out of your blood. So that doesn't work. But he was very clear and candid about the fact that when the story requires it, you can tweak the science a little bit. So science has to be good, but the story always trumps the science.
So I would just add one other perspective, because we're talking a lot about movies, that there are also many examples of written science fiction which are very effective. And in written science fiction, you have less of an excuse to get it wrong. But again, I don't want to dwell on the negative. Let's talk a little bit about the positive. What happens to make science fiction, when the science is right, even better? And I would like to suggest a story which I enjoy assigning. It's by Jeff Landis, who's a NASA scientist, and it's called Walk in the Sun.
Terrific story.
It's a story in which the protagonist is essentially required to keep walking on the moon to keep up with the sun, because the suit that keeps him alive is powered by the sun, so he can't allow the sun to set. And it's a wonderful way of describing what it's actually like on the moon, what the day and night cycle is like on the moon. And I think my students could learn more from that story about what it's really like on the moon and enjoy it more than some dry description in a textbook. And so that's the way I see the science being important, when it's a good story and it actually conveys the feel of the place or the feel of the phenomenon effectively.
Speaking of people who get it right, there's, who is it now? David Brin, who just walked into the back of the room here as unexpected special guest. David Brin, author of the Uplift Saga. And his new book, Existence, is just out now. Hi, David. Didn't expect to see you here.
I wouldn't miss you, Kevin. It's like a black hole of critical mass.
Andy brought in an interesting distinction here between written science fiction and film and television science fiction. And, let's face it, real detectives aren't like Angela Lansbury's character on Murder, She Wrote. The bar is pretty low for most film and television depictions of any kind of profession or any kind of field of expertise. And there's nothing unique about being a scientist and watching a program and saying, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. If you bowl as a hobby, and you see somebody bowling on TV and they do it wrong, you go, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. If you're an insurance agent and the insurance agency character on a TV show does something wrong, everybody brings their critical faculties to bear. What's intriguing is that in Hollywood in particular, there's a specific contempt for those whose critical faculties are affronted by errors in science and technology. That is, they can be dispensed with, in a way that if they're doing NYPD Blue, for instance, and you're gonna say, well, all the police officers in the audience are gonna be turned off, you know, if Andy does this, that's not gonna make sense, right? They'll fix that. If you say all the geeks in the audience are going to be turned off, they'll say, it doesn't matter, they'll still watch the show, they'll debate it endlessly, they'll come to the cons, they'll pay for autographs, don't worry. They never give up on us, they'll stick with us forever. It's really true. And when I was working on Flash Forward, the adaptation of my novel on ABC, we were told by ABC Studios that every time we mentioned a scientific concept, 250,000 people would not return after the commercial break, that it was actually something that was a negative in a science fiction show. Whereas in a science fiction book, there's a spectrum of the audience, of course, but you can be as indulgent or as in-depth as you want to be in the science in a science fiction book and know that there's an appreciative audience for it. In fact, whenever anybody says, well, there's too much science in your science fiction book, which sometimes people say to me, and I'm sure Dave has heard that as well, the answer is, it's like saying, there's too much sex in your pornography. There can't be. It's what it's about, for God's sakes.
So let me ask,
Russ, can
I want to add to that. I agree with everything that was just said, but it is changing. You know, the role. There is something called the Science and Entertainment Exchange in LA, and they're a branch of the National Academy of Sciences, and they have a fairly lengthy list of people who are willing to consult. They're all scientists on Hollywood present performance of productions, and they're trying to change that. Their goal is to raise the level of science dialogue in Hollywood, and with some degree of success. But I'm happy to point out that I'm working on season 3 of Falling Skies, even before we started season 2, and one of the writers came to me and said, okay, now we're going to figure out what's the backstory, what's going on here, why did the aliens come here in the first place? Because I already told them when I started on the show, please don't say they're here for our resources because I will quit on the spot. Because unless you use the cure for cancers in the rainforest kind of argument, that for some reason they're harvesting something from us that no one else makes, any other resource natural they can get elsewhere much cheaper. But so we got a good backstory, and the writer said, okay, here's what we want to do, can we do this? And I took some code I'd actually originally written for Prometheus, and looked at the local star systems, and the galaxy was amazingly cooperative. And this is something I've told people, all weekend. I wish I could share this story right here, right now. I can't, because it's like we haven't even written the season yet. We're just kind of working out where we're going. But we've got the geometry and the types of stars in our local neighborhood and stuff, all playing into what's going in the backstory of Falling Sky. So a year from now, if invited back, I will share this, and I'll even bring PowerPoints. So I agree with everything Robert said, but I think there's a genuine effort in some cases, perhaps not ABC, to get it better, to improve upon that.
Okay, and I want to make a comment on the unobtainium, because when I was in graduate school, and we were working on some papers, and this was before dark energy had been established, and we were in the cold dark matter era, and then we found that the cold dark matter models didn't quite fit, and we were looking at something where we needed to have a little bit of neutrinos in our model to try and fit the galaxy formation scenarios that were trying to put out. And so we got mixed dark matter, is what we ended up doing in one of these papers. And we started talking about it, is this too many? Because we don't know what the dark matter is. And then we start saying, oh, well, we can invoke neutrinos. But invoking this dark energy stuff, well, as to quote my PhD advisor, that becomes 2 invocations of the tooth fairy. Even in science, you don't want to push the incredulity of your audience. We don't know what dark matter is. We do know neutrinos exist, so we're happier to go there than we were to go to this dark energy. So, I mean, this is why the dark energy just won the Nobel Prize, because the observations forced us to go where we really didn't want to go. We already had, one unobtainium, and we had to invoke a second unobtainium with dark energy. So in science, too, we try and avoid straining the incredulity of our audience.
Well, let me ask this. Is science fiction a help or hindrance in the education of the public audiences?
I want to start with that. I told a story earlier. I hope so. If it's a repeat, I apologize. But for a long time, I've done a lot of public outreach, a lot of general public talks, or a lot of K-12 outreach, and even to college classes and stuff. And one thing I find is one of the hardest ages to reach is the 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade. Anybody who's a teacher knows that you get this kid. And generally, when I talk about the space program, I talk about Saturn or talk about the Mars missions or something, I usually feel that my subject matter will win the day. And oftentimes it does, because people who wouldn't normally listen will listen about space when you're talking about real stuff, and we're really going here, people, And still you get... But when I first started on Battlestar, I knew that there would come a day when the show was over, but I would always be that guy who worked on Battlestar, and everybody, or a lot of people think, hey, if you work in Hollywood, that's really kind of a cool thing to do. So I will get, and when I do outreach talks, I will get this kid, and more often than not, or fairly regularly is a better way of phrasing that, fairly regularly that kid who wouldn't normally listen will listen in rapt attention to every word I say, just so at the very end he can ask that question. He's been dying to ask, Tricia Helfer? So it's been a great help, because it's a bridge. It's a bridge to real science.
You're the educator.
Oh.
Well, of course, that's like bringing coals to Newcastle. Of course, I think it's useful. What I would say about it is that oftentimes scientists will disdain science fiction as an educational tool, in part because they haven't read good science fiction. And that so often, because Star Wars and things and fantasies, like Rob said, are so popular and so much in people's minds, that people, even scientists, even educators, are not aware of the sheer volume and quality of good science fiction stories that do have educational value. And so one of the things I like to encourage is that the science fiction writers, the educators, and the scientists get together to give a little more prominence to those stories that really do illuminate good science, and to downplay sort of the role of the very worst science fiction. I don't know how much luck we've had, because we have no PR apparatus or money, whereas those big budget science fiction films have all the PR apparatus and budget, but maybe you can help us in that respect.
I had somebody write to me just recently who said that, I guess, I had a novel that came out in 2000 called Calculating God, and she had read it when she was 12, I suppose, and she wrote to me to say she had just finished her PhD in geology, and she'd been inspired to study paleontology and then ultimately go on to do geology from reading my novel. And every science fiction writer who is a serious science fiction writer can tell the same story over and over again of people who have gone into scientific careers because they were inspired by science. So if you ask, is it a hindrance in the classroom? I will tell you that people go to the classroom because they've been inspired by serious works of science fiction.
Okay, I'm gonna be contrarian here, okay? I mean, they've made good arguments for why science fiction is great, and I use it in all my talks, and it's a great touchstone. But there is one aspect of it that actually hurts education. How many of you have seen Empire Strikes Back? How many of you remember the asteroid belt scene? All right, how many of you think that asteroids are dense in the universe? Because of that scene, you probably do. And you gotta recognize that in our own asteroid belt, the average distance between asteroids is about 1 million miles, okay? And you didn't know that because you wouldn't do the calculation. Well, I had to do the calculation for my talks. And what it does is sometimes science fiction, especially the visual depictions of it, set up a mental model in your head of how the universe works. And when kids get that mental model set in their head and they try to learn science, real science, on top of that incorrect mental model, the misconceptions get in the way of teaching correctly. What we do a lot at STSCI in our education program is help teachers recognize the misconceptions that kids will have. so that when they start to learn about how the solar system works, okay? Wallace and Gromit. I love Wallace and Gromit. But in A Grand Day Out, they're flying to the moon and stars are streaming past, you know? And it's so innocuous, you know? But to put it in Wallace's own terms, it's just a harmless bit of brain manipulation, okay? And it's because it's so beautiful, because it's so entertaining, it sinks and is remembered. So in the sense that it can set misconceptions in students' minds, that's where we have to watch out.
But your examples are Lucasfilm and Wallace and Gromit. How many of you have seen 2001? How many of you have seen 2001?
Yes.
There's a scene in an asteroid belt in 2001, too. There's a scene that establishes that they've passed the orbit of Mars and are on their way to Jupiter. You see the Discovery going by at great stately speed. One asteroid tumbles by, and about 15 seconds later, you see another smaller one, and that's it. And that's almost 10 years before Empire Strikes Back, and it's a much more significant film. So if you're saying that bad examples of anything are an impediment to classroom teaching, that's true. I don't know if the singer Feist is popular down here. Well, she did the Apple commercial. 1, 2, 3, 4. She skips 2 numbers when she's counting to 10, right? Disastrous. She skips 7 and 8 in that song, right? Disastrous for mathematical education. No, actually, it's just a catchy little tune. And all that Empire Strikes Back is a catchy little film. But when people do it seriously, it does way more good than it does harm. More people have heard of an asteroid belt because of science fiction than not.
And I should point out that when we did SCAR on Battlestar Galactica, which was dogfighting in amongst asteroids, it was a protoplanetary disk where the surface density is much higher. Thank you very much.
I'm glad to hear that.
I'll just add one thing having to do with language. After all, linguistics is a science. It's a social science, but it's a science. I think the alien languages in films like Avatar, in the Star Trek series, have definitely had positive effects on education. There is now a community of people out there who are learning Navi, for example, and learning it very well. And it's a very hard language. It's a very complicated grammar. And I've heard from high school students who have said things like, you know, I was never really into my Spanish class, and I never did very well in French, but I really want to learn this language. So can you tell me the difference between a transitive and an intransitive verb? And I think that's absolutely great. I mean, it's stimulating people's imagination. And there's no reason to think that once your imagination is stimulated via fiction, you won't carry that over into the real world and in this case, you know, learn some real languages.
Let's turn the questioning over to the audience.
So you need to get a volunteer to take the microphone.
All right. I think we're getting a volunteer right now.
How long do we go for? Do we go to 5 or
We're supposed to
15?
5:15.
So we only got 15 minutes for questions. Okay, all right.
Since this is the SETI conference, what do you think?
understand
What do you think the odds are of being able to produce a film? Because I agree with you about books, easier. That is not a summer blockbuster, but popular, based on realistic kind of life that we might find soon. You know, slime mold. So how exciting can that be? There are a few movies, have been for years, where you never see the actual asteroid disaster or whatever. So it's all about the human relationships. But again, they're not summer blockbusters. What's the chance of going into
Don't
like
even
life
say the word Armageddon. That's
All stories are about people. It doesn't matter what your background to that story is. It could be finding slime mold, it could be finding gold nuggets, it could be finding a lost letter from your grandfather. As long as the interactions of the people are compelling, you will find an audience for it. If you set up to say, let's have a banal story about uninteresting science and see if we can make money off of that, I'm not going to invest in your company.
Exactly. I just interviewed recently for a book I'm writing John A. Meal, who sinned by doing The Core, but made up for it by doing Creation, which was a movie about the life of Darwin. I hesitate to use the word biopic simply because he doesn't like the term biopic. But it was always about the characters. And he said, when they first approached him about that and said, I want to talk about Darwin And he said, I'm not interested, not in the least. That's not a story that interests me. But when they found an angle that emphasized the character interplay between him and his wife, who was deeply religious, who felt that by virtue of him pursuing this train of thought that they would be forever separated in eternity, that's an interesting angle. So as far as the slime mold itself goes, I probably couldn't give a rat's behind about the slime mold itself, but as far as the process of the people, the interaction, I'm completely agreeing with that, the last sentiment. However you gauge the story that goes around the slime mold is what's going to draw people or chase them away.
And I would say that my favorite author that I remember from my childhood was Isaac Asimov. And Isaac Asimov couldn't write a love scene to save his life. Oh my God, his male-female relationships really sucked in his books, but it wasn't what he wrote them for. He took scientific ideas, he created a novel situation, but the whole idea of this novel situation was to examine the human condition, how human beings would react in a situation that so far removed. It's a novel situation. So the science can almost be incidental to the science fiction, but I'd prefer if you get it as right as possible. I don't know if Isaac Asimov could write a really cool book about finding green slime, but if anyone could, he probably could have.
He did. He wrote a book called he wrote a book called The Gods Themselves, in which he postulated some really unusual form of extraterrestrial life.
This is for Mr. Summers on talking about science fiction not having a positive image on whatever. The easiest answer to that is, who could imagine a black woman scientist? I mean, give me a break. Or who could imagine a black tennis player? You've got Bill Cosby and Nichelle Nichols in 1969.
Yes.
We're old enough to remember that there ain't no such thing until then.
Okay, I was not arguing that all science fiction is bad. I'm just saying that, educationally, we can point out things that are just so pervasive in popular culture that they can actually hurt education. As I, said to my fellow panelists, I'm not arguing that science fiction is bad. They're great science fiction, and I really enjoy it. Okay, but when you have to deal with the repercussions of that sometimes. And so, yes, I think Star Trek itself was a incredible series because it did things that were against the standard culture at the time, and it took the public's mindset places that it seems sometimes that we're afraid to try and do that again at this point.
Can I add something that's not super related to that, but get the microphone to where, yeah. Sometimes the correct science can actually aid the drama. And I have a particular, I mentioned the A Word is in that really bad Impact movie that I mentioned earlier, that every scientist hates because the scientist is bad from the moment go. In fact, you start that movie out with Charlton Heston in his best God Has Smote Thee voice, it hit with the force of 10,000 nuclear weapons. Had they had a science advisor, they'd actually calculated it was way more. So here's a case where good science is actually a better story. That happens too. Come on, I'm in the back. We got a VIP who wants to ask a question. Hopefully we'll make a squirm.
That's immaterial, but I thought I'd mention to everybody here, since it's correlated what you were saying about combining education and science fiction and science and all those things. The news that down at UCSD we managed to get permission to create the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination.
Cool.
Support from philanthropists and industry, and it's going to bring neuroscience, cognitive science immediately to study this most fantastic, the greatest gift humans have. Well, love is good too. But the human imagination, and to study it with science, but combining it with the arts, literature, and we'd like to actually get a connection with Hollywood. So
Sign me up.
Let's talk.
All right.
But it's going to be very exciting, and I just thought I'd mention
Okay, Carolyn.
Okay, one of you said something about storytelling and drama, and as a longtime science fiction reader and writer, and I write planetarium shows actually, and planetariums are another place where people have been inspired to go into science. I was inspired by science fiction myself, the best stories that are told will incorporate the science really well. But where I'm going with this is there's been a lot of recent discussion in literary circles about whether or not science fiction is really literature. And it was ghettoized. I know where you're going.
I'm angry. I'm already
Oh,
angry.
no.
I'm pissed off, Carolyn.
No, it's been ghettoized, but the people who are in the literary critique circles do not realize this stuff is good, most of the time is a good storytelling. You have to have principles of good storytelling and drama and all of the things that make people want to turn those pages. And if that science is integral, it's going to work. I mean,
And how do the snobs react when you tell them that all their stories are a subset of science fiction?
Well, let's not get started on Ursula Le Guin and how she was treated or some of the others. But I mean, science fiction movies get off in this other thing. We don't win too many Academy Awards. Sometimes they do, but for a long time they didn't. How many people on Star Trek won an Emmy or an Academy Award for their work?
Not to be cruel,
But-
how many people on Star Trek deserved an Emmy Award?
Yeah, but
for
a few
acting?
did. But a few did. Some of those stories should have.
Well, and Shatner
Yeah.
is the one guy who ultimately went on to win 2 Emmy Awards,
Well, that's
actually.
true.
But okay, to your point.
But you know where I'm going with
I
this
do know
is
where
that-
your point is going
yeah.
here. Let me address your point here. First, number one, what the literati care about, who gives a shit? Right? They're a tiny little subset of, a tiny little subset of academia who are incestuously interested in each other's work. And the whole study of literature is how one work is in dialogue with another work. And if you're not familiar, and you take the canon, and everybody keeps teaching the same canonical titles because the dialogue works, and the professor doesn't have to learn anything new to say, well, it's actually a riff on Moby Dick, or it's Tom Sawyer rewritten. And you can say that endlessly dealing with the canonical core texts. Science fiction is all about dialogue, too. The classic example is Robert Heinlein wrote Starship Troopers and Joe Haldeman in dialogue with it. I would like to say that my novels Wake, Watch, and Wonder are in dialogue with William Gibson's Neuromancer. Everybody is in discussion with everybody else. It is a separate canon. If you're not familiar with that canon, and you look at it and say, I don't see why this book is significant, well, it's significant because it does something that the 1800 previous iterations of this theme didn't do. That's why it's significant. You have to know the literature. So they speak of from a place of ignorance, and that's a huge part of it. That said, almost every university in the United States and Canada has a science fiction course. Try to find the mystery fiction course, or the romance course, or the Western course, or the thriller course. They do not exist. So when people like to truck out, and I certainly have been known to do it when it's advantageous for me, to truck out the old chestnut that science fiction gets no respect, the reality is that we get way more respect than other genre fiction does. And when you talk about the bottom line, okay, how many science fiction films won Academy Awards? That may be a small number. How many science fiction films are in the top 10 movies of all time in terms of making money? And it's a very large number. How many summer blockbusters are broadly defined as science fiction films? The vast majority of them. So we're crying all the way to the bank.
And for Battlestar, I do have a Peabody hanging on my wall.
My point was, though, that there is all that generalization, but people are still learning the science. There's still science getting across to them. There's still that whole vision that there is science out there. But they somehow think it's different from every other bit of literature. And it's still-
Could we have the next question, please? Thank you.
Okay, so the question I want to have is a little bit of discussion regarding the place of SETI in terms of like modern science fiction in films, especially in TV, like the reimagined Battlestar. Essentially, you know, the Cylons are themselves. I mean, they're creation of, they're all kind of interrelated, right? There is no alien, right? The alien is ourself. In the Firefly universe, that's, you know, similar types of situation. You know, we are alone in there. We still haven't found something. As opposed to some of the other science fiction that's around, if you want to use the broader term, where, you know, we have aliens attacking battleships and, you know, total craziness and unreality and everything. But some of the ones that are trying to keep more reality, sort of like the alien encounter issues are maybe not as brilliant. Or maybe there are some examples that you can bring that really kind of show more of a realistic version of how, you know.
Well, I can say on Battlestar, that was a conscious choice from the word go. That Ron Moore wrote in the series Bible that we will likely never encounter an alien species in the run of the show, and if we do, it will be so alien as to be nearly unrecognizable. Now, the fact is, I argued that when they were on New Caprica, that was a newly formed planet, and any life they find there is necessarily alien. But that was just, that may have fit in with the religious dogma, but it wasn't where they want to go dramatically, and I agree with that. I just, as a science advisor, I pointed that out, that this is an alien planet with alien life. But for the most part, that was a conscious choice from the word go, that we are alone and the universe is very sparse. But I don't know if anyone wants to address other aspects of that.
Periodically, I try to sell things to Hollywood. And every time, see, the problem is that when you have an alien in science fiction, Michael Westmore, who did the makeup for the various later Star Trek series, pretty much exhausted every possible permutation of ears, noses, and foreheads that you could do to make an alien from somebody you could get from central casting. So if you're going to have a character who is an alien, and drama is about people, it's about characters, we've been through all these iterations of the humanoid alien. And I keep pushing projects where you would have non-humanoid aliens, because all of us here at SETICon know that if we do discover extraterrestrial life, the one thing we know almost for sure is they're not 2-meter tall bipeds with binocular vision at the front of their heads and navels. They're going to be something different than us. The pushback from Hollywood is always that people will not watch something that they don't identify as an actor underneath. And I think we're going to see the tipping point there, because there's kind of an uncanny valley issue, which is the thing in AI and robotics research where you don't really connect with something that's almost but not quite human. I think we now have a sophisticated enough arsenal in CGI to be able to do creatures like, say, Larry Niven's puppeteers, which are clearly non-humanoid in their body plan, and still make them come across as convincing characters. And I suspect you're absolutely right, that right now, aliens depicted in science fiction films are kind of passé, and if we do see them, they're like the aliens in what was your film? It was a big one, I remember it. Avatar, where they're basically humans who've been morphed with CGI. We're going to see that change because somebody is going to get the demo reel that actually will convince one of the studio heads that people really will watch a non-anthropomorphic alien and identify with it and care about it. And I and others are fighting that good fight.
And I would just like to add that there are many interesting examples of very different aliens in written science fiction. Those of you who have the little green handout, the very last website that I recommend at the end, I've been keeping, as I mentioned, a list of astronomically interesting science fiction stories, and there you can look both on the life in the universe and under SETI, and see some stories that take some risks and really look at some other kinds of life. David Brin and Rob Sawyer both have stories on the list, so I'm not ashamed to mention this, but take a look at some of the stories on that website about aliens that don't have to be pictured in the movies, but only in your imagination.
Let's take one more question, and then we'll ask the panelists to give us their final thoughts.
I was just wondering, what are the 3 things that you would have to say are the most commonly done wrong things in science fiction, not counting faster than light travel, because everyone does that wrong?
The planets are uniform from pole to pole, that artificial gravity is easy, and that the human body plan is prevalent throughout the universe.
Yeah, for me, the fact that all the aliens are humanoid is a big problem. But it's, if Rob is right, and if audiences can in fact relate to tentacled things with 8 eyes and 7 mouths, I don't know. I mean, that would be really interesting. I would love to see something like that succeed.
I would say communication, interplanetary and interstellar communication instantaneously. It's not just faster than light travel, it's also faster than light communication in terms of being able to get messages and things, and conservation of energy. There are transporters, there are, replicators, et cetera. There are so many things where just tremendous amounts, absolutely planet-wide amounts of energy are just suddenly available on a tabletop device. And the amount of energy needed to create things like this is just, well, it's just, I know it's necessary for plot devices, but it's just overlooked.
One of mine was similar related to that. It's actually a misunderstanding of energy, just period. Not only the conservation of it, but what it even is in the first place. Understanding energy goes a long way to understanding weaponry and a lot of things in science fiction. I also not a big fan of what's called the 10% myth. That notion that we only use 10% of our brains. And we actually, in Eureka, we did that with Henry Deacon, one of our characters, said, and this is actually true. I got roasted by this by my colleagues, but when I pointed out what he actually said, they backed off. One of our characters said, we only use 10% of our brain at any given time. And then when you factor that in, that's actually closer to being correct. So the any given time is the key distinguisher, which separates us from trite-dom. And thirdly is the ease of space travel. You know, when on August 5th, we're going to land a spacecraft on Mars called Curiosity, and it's far too massive and far too large to use the airbag technique that we've used previously with other Mars probes. So we're going to use a little mini spacecraft that's going to fire retros and lower this down on a cable, set the spacecraft down, and then fly away. And that's not easy. But we get, you know, we watch shows like Star Trek and SG-1. I watch shows like Star Trek and G1, and we think it's easy. And really, at this point in time, it's not. It's very hard to get to another planet.
And I guess I would add two. I would add sound in space.
Oh.
You know, got people crying in space and so forth. And the other one I would add are translators. This notion that an alien language would be so easy to understand that some box would just translate it right away. Part of what we grapple with a lot at the SETI Institute is, if we do get a message from another civilization, one, will we be able to understand it at all? And two, how would we be able to respond to it? It's probably a lot harder to understand extraterrestrials than science fiction makes it.
Oh, can I add one thing, though? In answer to the question earlier, on Falling Skies, we do have the skitters. We do have an alien race with 6 legs and 2 arms that look nothing like anything we'd seen before in sci-fi that are you know, and we do find a way to relate to one of them during season 1. Not that any of us who are on it now worked on season 1, but there is a counterexample, a relatively recent counterexample of that. And one counterexample doesn't make it law, but it's like I think starting to change.
So let me ask the panelists to give us, well, we have almost no time left, but give us 1 minute, your final thoughts. Do we need good science to have good science fiction?
Science fiction is a serious literary mode that embraces the scientific method and the scientific reality. It, in fact, is an antidote to all of the irrationality in the world. We take very, very seriously what we know, how we found it out, and what we can extrapolate from that. Science fiction is important. It is not fictional science.
I think science has to be as good as it can be while still engaging the audience and making